everyone. We are going to start on our mixing workbook today. Hopefully you found it for download. If you can print it on cardstock, that would be amazing. If not, you can print it on regular paper, but it'll buckle pretty good. Or you can just use it as reference digitally and then do it in on your mixed media paper, something that'll hold up to the wet media. Okay, so we are going to start working with our achromatic palette today. We're just going to use black and white. I have Liquitex Basics, but you can use any kind of acrylic paint that you want. We're using acrylic because the white is opaque, so we can understand value better because we can control the full value range, unlike if we were using watercolor or something where the white of the paper had to create the lights. And then we'll get into color in another video. We're going to make an achromatic value scale in 0, 30, 50, 70, 100. And then we're going to try and blend it where we make an ombre. Then we're going to do a couple painting tests where we try different ways of working with the material, using the brushes, using the palette knives. And then we're going to do a little sphere study so you can try to practice rendering a form in space. Okay, let's get started. The book starts with your table of contents. You have a materials list. These things are all can be traded out with other brands, but this is a good start. And we're just going to do the achromatic section. Then we'll get into color here, and then here's some extra ones at the end of the book too. So I'll let you look at that later. And here we go. So here's our achromatic mixing, and it's just the first three that we're going to do. Okay, so I'm going to start by getting our palette set up. I highly recommend one of these Stay Wet Masterson palette boxes. You can use like a Tupperware that you would put like brownies in or something that seals. You can use a cookie sheet with plastic wrap over it, but it gets kind of messy and unruly. Or you can just use like a paper plate. But what's problematic about that is that the paint doesn't stay wet very long, and it's like a one session painting and then it'll dry out. So this seals, and then inside of it, you can put different things. If you really get fancy, oops, dropped some stuff. You can do a glass palette or a wood palette, but we're just going to use a paper palette today. You can also, if you're trying to use a budget, use wax paper. So this palette paper, it's sealed at the end so that if you were to paint on it, it doesn't move around on you and buckle. But we're gonna tear a piece out and use this today. Another option that you can use that's a little more expensive, and this is for acrylic only, is this Stay Wet paper. And you put the paper in the box, you soak the box, you fill it with water just a little bit, and then pour the water off, and then that helps it stay wet longer. But this is a more expensive option, so we're gonna go with this today. I'm gonna clean my workspace, give myself a little more room, hopefully no more crashes. Okay, so on your form here, you see 0, 30, 50, 70, 100. And the idea is that often, like in a drawing class, you might see somebody make a full 0, 10, 20, 30, all the ranges up to 100. But when we're painting, it's easier to do broader jumps. And then that way you can kind of blend in between as you go. So I'm going to use the full length of the palette box, and I'm going to write on it. I'm going to stay on one side so that I can kind of mix out other things later. So I'm going to do my 0 here, my 50 in the middle, and my 100 at the bottom to match my scale. And then I'll put a 30 and a 70. That just kind of for notes. Okay, so I'm going to talk in food. You want to think about these kind of like cooking recipes. And we're going to talk in Hershey Kiss size, chocolate chip, mini chocolate chip, donut sprinkles, and grains of salt. So I'm going to start with a Hershey Kiss worth of white. And then the same for black. all paint brands have a different amount of tinting strength. And that doesn't matter with the color, it's more the brand, like how much pigment is in each tube. This is really inexpensive paint, so the tinting strength might not be what you would expect. This particular brand, the white is pretty wimpy, so we're gonna probably go through more of it. Okay, so then you should have some palette knives. People use these to actually paint with, like to apply material if they're making a chunky painting, which we call impasto. So there's all different shapes. What I recommend is picking one of the trowel type ones, like this, and I'm going to use the one that's like a diamond. Okay, so again, like cooking, I'm going to take 50% of my white and put it on my 50. And then get all the paint off there that you can so you're not wasting it. And this is a really important step. You're gonna need a towel. You can use a paper towel, you can use an old t-shirt, a washcloth, but you don't wanna contaminate your other sections of the paint. So I'm gonna wipe that off, and then I'm gonna use 50%. So I'm trying to make this about the same amount, like so. Now when we mix, we wanna use the bottom. We like kind of scrape the paint together and then squish, scrape, squish. So it's like you're squishing the paint together. What you don't want to do is like stir it, because it just doesn't really come together. So again, it's like squish, scrape, squish, and kind of go in different directions, kind of crosshatch with your palette until you have it all blended up. And then the goal with the acrylic is it's plastic. It's polymer emulsion, pigment, and water. So it'll dry up real fast. So you want to try to keep it in as big a glob as you can, so that it doesn't dry out quickly. We're not going to do this right at the beginning. I'm just going to show it now, but we'll do it as it unfolds. I have a spray bottle, and you can squirt the paint occasionally, and that's what helps keep it wet. We can spray the paper too, which I'll explain in a little bit. Okay, so now I have a big amount of 50, and then I'm gonna grab some of it, maybe a chocolate chip's worth or a little more. I'm gonna put it on my 70, and then again, so I don't contaminate my black, I'm gonna wipe off my palette knife, and I'm gonna try and make a 70. So maybe another chocolate chip's worth. Again, you're like scraping and squishing. And you might be saying, how do I know if it's a 70? How do I know if it's 50? It's really more that it's a relative scale, so you can keep shifting it as you go, and then you add little bits. Like you could add a donut sprinkle of black or a donut sprinkle of gray, or if you want to be really bold and just put the white in there, you can. But I actually think I'm doing pretty good, so I'm going to leave it. I'm going to wipe off my knife. And then the trick with painting, with mixing, is you always want to put dark into light. That way you're not making big, huge amounts. So what I mean by that is I'm going to grab my white, put it by my 30, and then I can do a donut sprinkle's worth, wipe your knife again, of my 50, or maybe a mini chocolate chip will do, like so, just a little bit. And then imagine if this was the 31st at that much, I would need that much white to make it turn. So dark into light is always the direction you want to go. Yeah, and just like that, I have a 0, 30, 50, 70, 100. Part of this exercise too is to figure out how far the paint will go, what its viscosity is, which means the tackiness of it, or the way that it moves on the surface. Okay, so we're going to use synthetic brushes. We can do almost everything we're going to do today with our big flat brush, which is a 1/2 inch. If you have bigger brushes like a 1 inch, that would work. We have a 1/4 inch here, or they call it a 10. These are flat because they're square on the edges. This is called a filbert, where it rounds on the end. And you want to think conceptually about your brushes. So if I want something softer looking, I would use this. If I want something choppier looking, I would use this, and so forth. We have rounds, I have a fan, anything can work. Okay, so I'm gonna start by charging the brush. I just have a cup of water here. I'm just gonna dip it in the water a little bit, kind of dry it off on my towel a little bit, just a little. But it's always good to kind of start with a wet brush. So then I'm gonna start with my black. I load the brush quite a bit, like a lot. Can you see that? And then I'm gonna paint out my 100. And I'm gonna make this a strong value step. These don't have to be perfect. They can be kind of painterly. Oh, I wanted to do something before I did this. I'm not gonna do it on this one, but I do wanna show you when we get to the next one, how we can keep a clean line around, oh, it's not gonna work, it's too narrow. I'll do it over here. We can keep a clean line around a form by taping some edges. We'll keep one side more organic. We'll get to this side in a second. When I do the tape, I want to just push on the edge I'm painting into and in the corner, but I don't want to seal it all down super tight because it will be hard to get it off. This is a low painter's tack tape, so it hopefully won't rip your paper. We have to be careful when we peel it. So again, this is kind of loose up here, but I'm squishing it down. Okay, back to this. So this step I'm about to show you is pretty important. I'm going to clean my palette knife off again. There is still so much paint in this brush. So I'm gonna go back to the 100 or whatever value is on your brush, and I'm gonna squish all that paint, that's a lot of paint, back into that area so that I'm not wasting it. And then I take this and I'm gonna scrub it on the bottom of my cup and kind of dry out my brush. I'm gonna do it different when I get to the 50, but I'll give you some options. So then I load my 70. Wipe off my knife. Your towel is your best friend here. Scoop out my 70. And then with the paint in there, what we call this now is a mother color. When we're using achromatic, it doesn't matter so much, but when we get into painting with color, chroma, it does matter. And it can help create a kind of harmony if you have this mother color when you shift to another color. So I'm gonna just come into here, mix that up with my brush into my 50, and then I skipped the washing out stage. So as you're doing this, I want you to kind of meditate through it and feel how the paint slides across the surface, see if it gets sticky, if it's too thin, and so forth. Okay, I'm gonna scrape this out. Clean off my knife, pivot to my 30. You can see I'm just kind of mixing that in. You can see how easily I could then make a 40 somewhere in between. So it's just these big, bold blocks. And you know, when we're looking at painting examples, design examples, often what we'll see is some really great designs. Look where I kind of grabbed some of that dark. So I'm gonna mix again and kind of go over that. You'll see some really great paintings with just what we call straight cell shading. That's what this is called, when you don't blend, but we'll practice blending in the next one. Okay, so then I'm gonna clean out my brush again, clean off my knife. This time going into the white, I am gonna rinse out my brush because I don't want to contaminate the white. Oh, and I'm gonna squish all this together. I didn't make as much 30, so I'm gonna keep that tight together so it doesn't get dried out too quickly. Again, every once in a while, you can do this. And I'm gonna rinse in my cup. dry it on my towel, pull the pigment out, and then I'll grab my white. Again, I'm using quite a bit of paint. And there's our strong 5-step value scale. By having these numbers under here, you can see that the paint is pretty opaque because we can't see the text underneath. There's different kinds of white and black. This is a titanium white, and it's usually opaque. And then the zinc or transparent mixing white, we would still see that number underneath. And we'll talk about what that means when we get into color. Okay, so now we're gonna do our ombre. Again, I'm just gonna push the tape just along the edges. I'm gonna paint this really fast. I'm gonna lay down my white first. You can still kind of see that number through there. I'm gonna not try to like cram paint under the tape. I'm gonna try to kind of paint away from those edges. And then I'm gonna switch to my 30. I'm just trying to get this on there as quick as I can. We are painting on raw paper, so it sucks up the acrylic pretty quickly. If you want, we're saving money in this exercise, but you can prime your surfaces first with a gesso, and that creates a barrier between the organic paper that sucks up the pigment, and it doesn't have it kind of soak up quite as quickly. I want to wipe out my brush before I get to my black so I don't contaminate it. So scrape your knife again. Scrape this into here. Push that together. And then, okay, so I contaminated it a little. Okay, so while it's wet, I am going to try to cross hatch these together. Do this sparingly, what I'm about to do. I'm just going to barely mist the surface, trying to get some of the paint off. And I'm going to, with a cross hatching mark, just like you would in a drawing, start to cut together. But I want to get most of the black off before I go to the 50, 70, 50. So that I'm not bringing too much up. So that's part of this exercise too, is like how much paint do you need on the brush, how little it will contaminate. Like if I went up here right now with all that dark in there, that would get too dark too fast. I'm gonna wipe it off again. I'm gonna rinse it out. If it gets too sticky, I'm just gonna put a little water on the brush to kind of reactivate. I wanna bring some of that light back down. And then while it's wet and while you're working quick, you can use a dry, clean brush. You use like your fan brush, you could use another flat. So this is dry. And I'm going to kind of scumble, which means kind of like rub over the surface, some of that together to kind of give it a little bit more of a blend. I don't love the white, so I'm going to rinse out my brush a lot, dry it off, grab a little more white. And lighten this up. Add a tiny bit of 30, so it's like a process, building as you go. And these can be kind of painterly. Add a little more, 50. And if you really want like a super smooth gradient, like you'd see in Photoshop, you'll have to take my painting class with oil. It's hard with acrylic because it's dries so fast. Okay, so then here comes the tape part. This is wet, but I'm gonna take the paint or the tape and peel really slowly, kind of at an angle. And you can see just by having that harder edge, it makes it feel more resolved. So all your mark making really matters. And it kind of gives this more like a painterly, gestural kind of mark, and it feels less messy when some of it is straight. The urge to rip this off like a band-aid will be high, but you want to go kind of slow and at an angle, and then it will less of a chance of tearing your paper. So it looks good when you have the clean edge, right? Okay, so I'm going to turn off the video. We're going to save this. If you're going to take a break in between exercises, squirt the paint and then put your lid back on. To put the lid on, well, in the instructions, if you read them, it says that you can run petroleum jelly in the edge with like a Q-tip, and that helps keep the seal. But you want to seat the corners first, and you have to push it on really hard. I'm not going to do it. I usually end up taking it, putting it on the floor and stepping on it. And then once it's fully on, you lift one corner, push out a lot of the air, and then seal it. Okay, so I'll be right back, and then in another video, and then we're going to do some mark making studies. Okay, thanks.